All right, so let's start with the recording already. So today we're going on the training. We're going to be running the training session 7. That's the one we have right here under your program we have following. And now we're going to start the last leg, which is this final week. And the whole idea is to touch on project workflow cases that essentially give you an idea of what are the typical tasks and skills you need to learn when you're dealing with consultants using typically other software and where the software is sharing IFC models, which are typically the format for BIM models that can be exchanged across multiple platforms. So what we're going to cover in these 3 sessions, just to give you an overview, will be the typical review of an IFC from a consultant. So that'll be the case where somebody has sent you an IFC and then you need to see it. And the typical thing to do is to review that on the context of a BIM viewer. In our case, we're going to be using BIMCollab before you decide to bring that into your working file in ArchiCAD. We're going to go through the process of checking basic internal model design review. Wait just a second. Just letting Edo in.
Sorry, I was on a call just now.
Oh, good. So there we go. We got more. No, that's it. So it'll be the process of, right, what do you do when you receive a model? How do you compare that against anything? And doing a couple of things that we have done so far, but we want to do that in the context of sort of like a real project, if you like. And that, what we're going to be doing today is going to be a little bit more of what we have done so far, but we will like to run this in the context of as if you were running the project using ArchiCAD and the other person using Revit, and then reviewing the files that we exchange. We're going to run through that using the plugin for ArchiCAD from Revit eventually. Checking something that you have dealt with in the past for coordinates and the back and forth communication. So that's going to be on tomorrow's session. Hopefully we can extend that to the next day, because that's typically the issue that, or the topic that brings most of the questions. So going back to just to rehash for Edo, who just joined in, at session 7, and we're going to shift gears a little bit, and rather than going back into the features of the tools, we're going to start working through project workflow cases, which are the typical things that you need to do when you are actually working on a project and that you receive models and send models. And there's essentially 2 steps. One of them is, what do you do with the IFC files you receive, or somebody sends you, and how, and then the flip side of that will be, all right, and how do you use these platform that you have now, BIMCollab Nexus, to communicate directly with the consultant. And that's a bit that I want to use by using Revit on my side and having you using ArchiCAD on your side. So I'm going to start with this, and let me just, oh, by the way, just in case, before we jump into that, please remember that the meetings have a link to this document, and the document has a link to the YouTube playlist where we have all of these recordings there for you to catch up or rewatch if you need to. So far we have 6 sessions. Today will be session 7, and that'll be there as well. We've got our Turner Studio.BIMCollab platform, and we're going to use some of that during today's session, although we're going to focus on local files to the most of it. But for tomorrow's session, what I would like you to do is to go to this website, which I'm going to paste on the document and probably in the meeting, and I'm going to paste it for you here on the chat. There you go. And what I'd like you to do with this link, if you want to click along and follow up the examples that I'm going to give and likely for tomorrow to run through the exercise is see if you can please get the ArchiCAD model. That's going to be this link in here. It's going to be a zip file for the ArchiCAD version of the file that we're going to deal with. And on my side, I'm just going to play engineer. Let's say I'm going to open a Revit model, and that's going to demonstrate how can we communicate through BIMCollab Nexus using the plugins and so on. For what I'm going to show you today, you'll need to download these BCP and IFC files. Just click on that. That's going to start a download. It's going to go there. And that's when I'm going to start the session today. So I'm going to have a sample here. And it's going to double click on that and open what we have right there. So I'm just going to actually extract all of that. Like so. And now we've got a sample. And the sample will have two folders. It'll have a file called BCP file. That's the BIMCollab project file that essentially has the assembly. It connects all the necessary files that you need in order to view the IFC files. I'm not going to do that now, only for the reason that the topic of today's session is, imagine you just have received the raw IFC, and then what do you do about them, right? So I'm going to close this link back. Actually, just as a reminder, you need to download the IFC files eventually for tomorrow. These you can do the end of the day today. But I want you to have the IFCs and the native ArchiCAD model. I'll be playing on the flip side by gathering the Revit side of it. And that's going to be tomorrow. Okay, so let's start with the sample files we have in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to imagine that you just received an email or received the link to download your consultant's file. So, and the moment you receive that, let's say that's this folder in here. And let's imagine there's no architectural, you just receive a structural file. And that's this one here. What do you proceed with that? Now, because you're using ArchiCAD as a tool, you'll be tempted to open that directly in ArchiCAD. I would recommend not to do that, only for two reasons. The reason number one is ArchiCAD will necessarily, just like Revit will do or any other modeling software, will have to do a translation from the IFC into whatever native tools the tool have. A viewer like BIMCollab Zoom or Colibri or another 200 viewers out there tend to have engines, 3D engines, that display the content without translation. There's some level of computer translation happening in the background, but usually giving you the raw geometry without having to transform it into a tool like the wall tool or the curtain wall tool or the slab tool or anything like that. So what do you do with these files to begin with? My recommendation, and probably the easiest, is that when you're using BIMCollab Zoom, which is what we're going to focus today for the investigation of these things, is simply to drag and drop these IFZ or IFC zip files. They're same thing. The only difference being one is compressed, the other one is not, and drag them into the navigation tab of BIMCollab Zoom. So all you really need to do is take the file from there and drop it to BIMCollab Zoom, and it will open, right? So that is the core. Let me just drop this on the side. So that's just the basic. Of just opening, but obviously you need to start looking at further things in this here. Let's imagine we're running through the architectural project of this, and you want to see, all right, what's in here? What am I going to get? Or let me take what am I going to get from this file, and how much of this file do I actually need, right? So typically the thing you want to do is, first and foremost, you want to see if this file has any specific location, because that tends to be a problematic thing particularly in the case of sharing files with other people that are not using the same program as you are. So there are two ways in which you can double check that. The first one is by looking actually at the parameters of the file itself and looking at its geolocation, or simply the location of the site, as it is called. That location of the site is usually what in ArchiCAD is called the survey point coordinates. So that's going to be one thing that we want to check. And then the other thing you want to check is the actual origin of the file. Because very likely, once you bring it into your own file, you want to have, or you want to be in a situation where the 000, or the origin of the three-dimensional file, matches regardless of the software that you're using. So let's start with the location of the site, and that is to be found once you receive the project. So once again, under navigation, you're looking at the project. Once you open the project, what you're looking at is the site. So that icon is for the site. And then once you open the site, you get the building. And then from the building, you get levels, and then within levels, the elements on the levels. What we're going to look at is the site itself. So in order to find the coordinates of this file, if it has any geo coordinates, is to select the site and then go down here to the tabs and go to location and review these two sets, global X and global Y. Latitude and longitude are not as much relevant because they don't really reflect any changes in the position of the file. They serve as a reference for other purposes that are, has more to do with the sun position and things like that, but they don't really affect the actual geometry location. So do remember that, because you don't want to be confused in terms of what are the numbers that you're supposed to be looking at. You actually are supposed to be looking at X and Y. So when you see 0 and 0, what that means in the case of this one file, for instance, is that the file that I receive has a location, but it's not, if it was a file in Australia, it will not be to MGA coordinates, right? Okay, so I know that. Cool. Now, even if that's the case, how do I know what's the orientation? Where is X, Y, and Z? Because I don't really see the typical 3 axes. You can actually see that, but you have to call it up. So the way we normally do that is you go into View and click on Show Model Origin. So once you click on that, you're going to see that a 3-axis origin will be displayed now in the model. Now, coincidentally, this was set up on purpose to be sort of close to the corner of the building right there. You can see that. So with that information, what I know now is that this corner right there is at 0, 0, 0. Anything below there will be negative, anything to the left and to the south will be negative numbers. So that's what I know now just by looking at this. What that means really is that if I then go back to ArchiCAD and I check my file, what should be happening is that the ArchiCAD origin should be roughly eventually exactly at the same spot, right there on the corner of the building. Now, you probably will like to have a little bit more precision to this. At the moment, those are the only things you have. You only have the 0 and 0. I don't have a way to check, not in BIMCollab Zoom, to check what's the position of this actual point. But you do, if you really need to do that, you do have that when we're looking at the model on the browser. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go straight into the model here on the sandbox project that we have. And I'm going to use the same space to upload. Let me just do it quickly. I'm just going to upload to the same project the structural file. So I'm just looking at it, finding on the folder. It's uploading now. And it's going to be here on the list. We can switch off the clinic because I really don't need that now. I'm going to leave this open. So you can see the same thing in here. I can actually see the origin in there, but in here you have an advantage. The advantage you have on the online viewer is that you have under the measurement tools, you have a coordinate measure. So if you click on the corner here, what that's going to tell you is what are the coordinates of that point. So looking at that, that is in X and Y is minus 40 millimeters, and it's flat at the surface, flat at 0. So if you have any reference, if you have a reference like I know what that wall is in my project, you can effectively just put a point in there for the coordinates and double check that on your project file. So that now should be from the origin of ArchiCAD, it should be 5 meters or 5,190 mil on the horizontal axis, the x-axis, and then vertically is 10 meters, 490 millimeters to the north or along the y-axis. So these will allow you to check with far more precision where is or what's the location of this model when you receive it before you decide to bring that into ArchiCAD if you ever choose to do so. All right, so that's figuring out the coordinates. What if the coordinates are wrong, right? What if, for instance, you have a completely different set of coordinates, like your origin is nowhere there, it's 5 meters to the south or the upper left corner, on the upper right corner, and so on. In those cases, you're going to have to move the model manually. Now, typically the best procedure is to request a model with the correct coordinates. But that may take time. They may take a week to get that to you. You're really need to use the information right away. So there is a way to move it on your own. And the way to do that is in the case of right here inside BIMCollab, Zoom, you can simply do a right click on the project and go to the last option there that says move and rotate. So now this is going to allow you to apply transformations into any axis. So you can move the model in the X axis, in the Y, or in elevation, or you can orient the project to a certain angle, right? I'm not going to do that to avoid undoing some of the bits, also because it's a little bit more difficult to pinpoint. But I'm going to move the model in this case. So what I'll say is, imagine, no, we actually have it. It just so happens that we've got that project. The origin is actually in the north left, not the bottom, and not the south. The top left or the northwest, not the bottom left or the southwest. And let's imagine, just for the sake of argument, we've got a distance. Going to move it some round numbers in here. And that is 22,500. So I'm just going to use that as a reference. And actually, just for the sake of argument, let's add a line for reference here. So I'm just going to add a line. It's not going to be super precise, but it's better than nothing. I'll paint it red and make it super bold. So that's where the origin is at the moment. And what I'll do is I'm going to tell this file, look, I need to relocate this. This is not right there. I'm checking my own file, and that corner should be 10 meters, 22,500 in this case. So you go to move and rotate. Now I found out that I need to move this to the north. Well, actually, how do you know that? Just look at this from the top. So I'm going to go here and click top view. So that's the XY axis. And I know that my project, it's actually has the origin right there. So I'm going to have to move this such that the origin is now up here. So where do I need to move this? Well, I need to move the entire building south just to make sure that the origin now ends up being in the top left or northwest corner of the building. By how much? 22,500. So let's go into the Move and Rotate tab. I'm going to go and change not the x-axis, but the y-axis. And I'm going to say, I'm going to push it down, right? So anything that goes down in that axis is going to be negative. So I need to move the model minus 22,500. That's going to push it south. If I had also to move it to the other corner in the x-axis, then I'm going to have to do that. If the elevation is wrong, then I'll have to do that. Or the orientation, then I'll have to do that. But let's take one step at a time. Moving in only on the y-axis. Click on OK, and now you'll see that the origin is now sitting 22,500 on the top left. So effectively, we have moved that by 22,500, as you can see there in the dimension. Dimension in annotations typically stay put, so that you can figure out what has happened with the original sorry about that, with the original position of the file. If you need to rotate the model, it's better to do the rotation before you do any local transformations, because the rotation will rotate the model not from the origin, but rather from the central, sort of the center of the mass, if you like. I don't like it, but that's the way it is. I wish it would rotate from the origin, but it's not doing that. So you can reset this. You can actually set these back. So delete that by clicking reset, and then the model will go back in place. So I'm going to move and rotate. Let's say we need 11 and a long number, something like that. Because usually when you locate to north, that's usually the weird number that you get. So I'm going to click on OK. And now, once again, you see where the origin is. You see how the model hasn't really rotated from that origin. It sort of rotates from the center of gravity, if you like. So even if you need to do that, what you'll have to do is then come back right here and really delete that X and Y rotation. If you really need to rotate along the origin, which is more likely to be the case, then I'm going to have to reset the X and Y. I cannot click on reset because that's going to reset the orientation. So effectively what I need to do is take this value in X and type it again, but in positive, and 5, 6, that's it. And then this one, which is positive, in negative, 5, 51, 1, 2, something like that. Okay, so that now is gonna ignore the actual translation in X and Y. There you go. So now this, hold on. Oh, I made a mistake in here. That was supposed to be negative. I'm gonna have to redo this to 1.024. Sorry about that. I wasn't paying attention. 10 meters. So this number is the same as that, just negative. There you go. So now you can see how, that's why I keep using that reference. It's being rotated by 11 degrees, did I say? Yeah. 11 degrees geometrically, so it's going this way. 11 degrees from that red line, but now it's being rotated from the actual origin, which is actually a good idea because it's the only point that you can pinpoint. Center of gravity could be anything. So those are the two steps that I'll have to do if I ever have to rotate and relocate. Typically, you first do the rotation, reset to make sure that it's rotating along a point that you can find. And then based on that point, then you can go ahead and say, all right, and then I need to move this on the XY axis, let's say 22,500, just to use the same number. Actually, that was not meant to be on the x-axis. That was meant to be on the y-axis, if I'm correct. And by doing so, now that's going to move that way. I'll give you a top view. And then it's going to move that way along the x-axis. Cancel this. There you go. Just like that. You get both rotation and translation, if you like. All right, so much for the transformation of these things. Sometimes it is useful, well, I may not have a model right now because this model is not geolocated, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you the example anyways. Sometimes when the models are geolocated, the location might not be super precise, and that's going to result in some minor annoying discrepancies. If that's the case, but you know that the models have the origin in the same place, so the actual Revit origin and ArchiCAD origin are the same, you can revert the models to their original coordinates, and that's going to be using this option here that says coordinate. It's probably a vague name for a button that does something very specific. And essentially what it does, it just uses whatever model you have loaded first and tries to match everything else to that model using the internal origin rather than the georeferencing numbers. So doing it with a single model doesn't really does much because I only have one model. But if I have multiple models with different locations, then the coordinate button helps you bringing them to the same position if the origin was set originally with the same setup. It does help quite a lot when people are using the other models as a reference, but they forgot to provide a georeference. So essentially you're saying, look, I know the one model that I loaded first, usually the architectural model, has the correct coordinates, just bring everything to follow that. So in short, that is the coordinate button right there. Again, it's not going to do anything because I'm going to show you what it tells me. It says the model is already coordinated. I don't have any other model to coordinate against, so just going to tell me that. And the location is going to be whatever location I have currently. All right, so that's for double checking locations using BIMCollab Zoom and flipping back to Nexus, checking it on the online viewer simply by, remember, this is a manual upload. This is not going to follow whatever locations I put in there on the other one. I have to do something else to achieve that. In the online viewer, you have the option to check coordinates. They might be catching up to this. I hope the local viewer Zoom gets access to that. All right, so that's one thing. Then further down, you also need to double check that whatever you're receiving, you are aware of it and you have a sense of what you're going to get if eventually you bring this into your ArchiCAD model, which is, in many cases, probably not for everything, but some bits and pieces is desirable. And when you do that, ArchiCAD will allow you to bring in not the whole thing, but individual bits and pieces. And you know what those pieces will be. So this is where you start investigating the model from here on the navigation tab. So I'm going to do two things in here. The first one is showing you the two ways in which you can investigate this. One way is by using the typical hierarchical distribution of a model, which is project, a site, a building, and then stories. And the very basic thing for you to do is simply select one story at the time and click the equal button. And essentially what this is doing is the equivalent of displaying a single story in ArchiCAD. In ArchiCAD, you hit Command-Shift-A, I think it is, or Alt-A, and you can show it to display just the contents of an individual story. It's the same in here. This is everything that belongs to foundation. It's there. Everything that belongs to the ground floor is there, including things like this, like to me, it looked like an error. So these are elements that are present in the levels above, but they have the home story to be ground floor. This is going to be the first floor. So now you can see how this looks weird because these columns actually are on the first floor, not on the ground floor, but it's bad modeling, let's say. Then on the second floor, I've got a little bit of a piece of a roof, and then the contents there, and then the roof. So that's one way. Okay, you can tell, right, what's on the foundation, what's on the ground floor. I have to watch out for those because that's in the wrong place. First floor, second floor, and then roof. Cool. Now, what if what you want to check is, look, I don't mind about the storage too much. I'm probably just going to bring in only the stuff on the ground floor. I want to coordinate this. And I need to bring in a bunch of things that has changed. I only need to bring in the walls. How do I do that? All right, so there are two ways to do that. On the one hand, you can go and open that story and select only the items that you're looking for, like walls, and click the equal button or simply hit equal on your keyboard. Now, only walls will be selected, right? And upon this selection, you can then investigate which wall types or which wall elements you may have. So you can open that, and what you get is a list of things. Usually they give you the names of the walls, and that tends to be fairly telling. So in this case, I know these are because I can read them there, those are the elevator walls. I'm pretty keen to know what those are. LB and LB, I'm not really sure what do they stand for, but the moment you select them, they're going to be highlighted on the wall. So it's easy for you to pinpoint what are those and whether you need them or not. And let's go to the NLB. And then those are going to be this. Actually, look at they're colored differently. All right, but now you can tell which one is which. On the flip side, it seems that there's some columns that actually belong to the next story. That's a mistake. Now, on the flip side, if what you need is, say, all the walls on this thing, but you don't want to separate them by the story, you can also check the next tab right here under navigation, which is going to ignore whatever models you have there or whatever different stories you have, and it's only going to focus on the type of elements. So now I'm going to look at the walls right there, and let's click on OK. And now I'm going to have a subdivision per type, not by the name of the wall, but the type, right? So these are limestone walls. These are concrete walls, prefabricated. So it looks like the lift, it's prefab. And this is concrete, likely cast in situ, which is, I believe that's going to be the foundation right there, right? So then based on this, you can decide, look, I really only need this and that. I'm more than happy to just bring those two types into my ArchiCAD file because those are the ones that I need to coordinate or something similar to that. You can further down investigate, materials and so on. And as I explained, I think it was session 5 and 6, to have not an on-the-fly understanding of the model, which is what I'm doing, just literally on the fly, just checking for things. If you want to have a more systematic understanding of the model itself, what you tend to do is to go to Smart Views and create filters. Again, I've got a set of inventories that I work with. Usually that includes trying to understand the whole thing now from the point of view of layers, let's say. So now I've got a list of layers in here. got eye walls, which are probably going to be internal walls, I guess. Not quite. It's kind of a weird split, but that's what I've got. We have floors, columns, and foundations, for instance. So that's going to be another way. Or materials, got concrete, and then some concrete prefab, steel, and timber. Pretty much that. Or if I divide it into wall types, then I've got 3 wall types, according to you can see there. And that's going to give you different understandings of what are you looking at. Most of this, if I show you, it's a fairly simple listing of different elements divided by a particular property, which is important for, because that's how you make sense of the actual model and why it is important to model it correctly, not just with whatever generic material you found on the model. So in this case, this is calling up for the material name, which is one of the properties in the list, and saying, well, if it does have a material defined, add it to the list and then give it a color, automatically a color. So that the lists being a very similar thing. I'm not sure. Well, okay, let's run layers, which is very common. This is just going to give me numbers if I need to count for things. 71, 44 items on the internal walls, 71 on external walls, etc., etc. So I'll give you a rough understanding of how do you go about checking this. Now, I'm going to jump ahead in the process. Going to turn this back. And now I'm going to make the assumption that, no, let's see, arcade file. I'm going to make the assumption that we're dealing with a situation where I actually have designed this project and I have my file in ArchiCAD, which I do, and that's what we're going to start doing tomorrow. And I have exported my own IFC. So what you want to do is do the coordination in here, because it's a lot easier, and just bring in your own IFC to the mix. So now my IFC is that. I've got that file located somewhere else, but again, that's some of my own doing. You remember the origin, I was making the assumption that it was up here. It is not. So I'm going to correct the location of that. And now you know that if you have to move that, in this case, it will be moving south 22,500 and rotating to whatever rotation there is. The architectural file, you can check it again. I've got a site with location 0. And if you check the location here, it's located at 0. So nothing to do there other than bring in the structural and get rid of these 2 numbers, which now you know, because all I need to do is reset. If it was a different thing, if I know that I need to move them certain distance or give them the rotation to north that you have, you just need to copy those numbers from ArchiCAD in your case and move them down here. So I'm just going to click on reset. And very likely, if I check this like so, they're both in the same place. All right, so now what I have is I've got my own file and I have the architectural file in here. How do I compare the two? How do you go about checking, do these guys have this same model in the same place and the elements are aligned with my elements? Easiest to do, and with this I'm going to wrap up today's session just to make sure that we don't run it too long. The easiest thing to do typically is just by visually checking, right? And the way you want to do that is creating a filter or something like it that overlays the 2 models and allows you for a clean check without you trying to figure out exactly what you're looking at. So the first thing is typically just by selecting one of the models and give them a color. say set color blue, then take the other one and let's say with a right click, set color. I'm just gonna give it a red, but not so much, such a bright red, maybe something like that. And click on OK. Now, at first, I don't see too much, but that's usually because the model is being covered. So there's two ways you can proceed in here. Typically, a very common one is just by adding a section plane, and then you're gonna start sectioning this from the bottom up or vice versa. And then you're gonna start seeing things with different colors right away. And I think I've got, well, I don't know if I had a mismatch in here, but this is the way I'll do that. Go and say, all right, those columns, they are in the same place. When you see that changing colors, they're usually on spot. And you can go like that and double check things, add another section and compare the slabs and so on. That's a visual simple check. I typically combine this, and it's suggested you combine that with some level of transparency. So you can take the architectural model with a right click and hit Set Transparent. And if anything, what this is going to do is reveal anything that the architectural model may be covering, and you just couldn't see it because it was a solid model, right? Now, with this, you can only go so far and visually checking if the model elements are in the same place or not. Like, for instance, do I have those models in here? If you're not sure, typical thing to do is to click one of them and isolate that, click the other one and isolate that. And typically you're going to be able to see whether the elements are in one model or the other. So those beams are present in both. So that's likely to be coordinated. Set that all the way up. And then the last one is doing so, but in a consistent and standardized way. And typically that's done through smart views. So if we give you an example here, like right in here, just gonna add a smart view there. And what I'm gonna do is call these compare structural elements. And let's say I want to compare the columns, right? So I'm gonna say, okay, let's find me all the columns of all of them. No, let's find me just the ones from the model that contains the acronym ARC. That's going to be the structural, the architectural. You want to check, just click on equal. Okay, all of those are meant to be columns. All right. I'm going to add them, but I'm going to add them and set them to a specific color. So I'm going to say add and set color. I'm going to say blue, but actually I'm going to give it a little bit of transparency with this alpha channel. So I'm going to say 100. Now going to be colored like that. And I'm going to duplicate the same, but this time for the structural columns. And a slightly different color, let's say on the red side. All right. So I'm just going to click on save. I can even delete all these section planes. And just by double clicking that, I'm having a standard isolated way of checking just columns, right? So now I'm checking, do I have these columns in one model and the other? Yeah, look, they're pretty much the same. These ones might be the same. Maybe those are ones are shorter than the other ones. And they're not having these as a column at least. It might be some other type of element. You can see a little bit of discrepancy there, but sort of too minor to worry about, I think. And you can imagine you can do the same thing if we were talking about, let's say, floor slabs. So we're going to say slabs in here and slabs there. Double click. And now I'm comparing only the slabs, like so. And now I can tell, oh, look at that. That's not quite the same. I need to know whether that is correct or not. In my case, that slab seems to be coming from the structural file. Maybe I do have that in a roof. Let's double check. Yeah, that might be the case. If I click on that, that's a roof. So let's include the roof elements. So slabs with contains architectural. I'm going to duplicate that and say also include the roof just in case. All right, that looks a little bit more consistent. And then I'm free to check and compare these things. You can notice that there might be some discrepancies and you'll have to discuss that, but this is the tool that you use to go and say, all right, guys, let's coordinate this. I think you're missing this, you're missing that. Let's double check whatever thing on grid G3. Thickness is not what it's meant to be. You can cut sections through these and use the typical tools that you normally will use for coordination moving forward. All right, let's stop it right there. So I'm going to minimize this for a second. And what I'd like to remind you is for next session, as much as you can, try to go to this website, which I'm going to drop in the document for you to link right away, and download the ArchiCAD model. Also download the BCP and IFC models, so you can have them handy if you need. And I'll upload those to the Sandbox project online, so you'll have access to them. But the idea will be that moving forward, we want to run the exercise, you using ArchiCAD and using the plugin, communicating with me, which now I'm going to be playing the engineer and sending messages back and forth. All right, let me stop the recording then.
Thanks, Nando.
You're very welcome. Please let me know if you don't, some reason don't get access to any of that, and I'll upload this recording by the end of the day today.
Thanks, Nando.